Traffic Regeneration Manager for Swansea Council, and in today's video I'm going to be providing you with a short briefing on the carbon reduction grant which is now available from Swansea Council. So a bit of background first of all. You may be familiar with the Shared Prosperity Fund that's run for the past 3 to 4 years. You may have indeed looked at this particular carbon grant. So this is an entirely new round of funding called the Local Growth Fund. And whilst there are similarities with the Shared Prosperity Fund, there are also some minor changes and tweaks to what is now the Local Growth Fund, hence this briefing. So through the Local Growth Fund, we're able to provide a range of business grants, each of which have their own briefing on this YouTube channel. But there's also a range of other business support activities available, including grants, as I mentioned, business startup events, workshops, a variety of support. So do check our web pages for further details of that additional support that's available through the Local Growth Fund. So this carbon reduction grant, what's the purpose and why are we offering this particular grant fund? So first thing to mention is this carbon reduction grant is available to established businesses only. We do have a pre-start grant which caters for startups, but this grant is available to established businesses that are already operational. And it may sound obvious, but I'll state it anyway. This is aimed at businesses who wish to reduce their energy consumption and associated costs that go with that, so reducing their overall carbon footprint. So in terms of the funding available under this grant, so the standard offer for this carbon reduction grant is £10,000 worth of grant funding. That is the standard offer that you would have available to you when applying for this fund. However, above and beyond that, we are able to offer a greater amount, and that greater amount is based upon essentially the value for money that your scheme is able to deliver. And that value for money is worked out on a ratio between the amount of carbon reduction, the tonnes of CO2, which I'll come on to talk about shortly, versus the overall level of grant that you're applying for. So it's grant versus carbon reduction and the value for money ratio that exists between those two elements. And again, I'll cover that in a bit more detail shortly. However, if your project does deliver high value for money in terms of grant requested to carbon reduction, we may be able to offer up to £30,000 worth of grant funding. So a significant leap beyond that initial basic 10,000 grant available to you. So what does that mean in real terms? So any project that is seeking to go above that £10,000 must be delivering at least 2 tonnes of carbon per £10,000 worth of grant funding. So it must be above that 2 tonnes of carbon per 10k's worth of funding. And regardless of the level, whether it's the 10k or the 30k, there is a flat 50% match funding requirement in all grants. So essentially for every pound that we put in, you would need to put a pound in yourself up to that limit of £10,000 or £30,000, depending on which grant you're eligible to go for. So in terms of what's eligible under this scheme, now before I mention these, there is a far more detailed list available on the scheme guidance. I'm not going to cover in minutiae of detail everything that's listed because it would make this video too long. So I'll summarise it here, but if you want to request further details of specifically what is available, I say that information is available on our scheme guidance. So I say 3 broad categories really in terms of what's available. The first of which we loosely class as energy generation. That could be solar panels, solar power or wind power. In 99% of cases, if not 100% of cases, that is going to be solar panels on the roof of your business. Whilst wind power is in theory available, we haven't funded any of those across the 3 to 4 years of the project. So I think realistically, you're looking at solar with regard to that element of it. Second element is energy conservation, so reducing the consumption of energy within your business. Examples of that may be LED lighting to reduce the energy consumption for those, or insulation within the business. So again, just think about ways in which you conserve energy within the business. And then the third one is changes to business practice, which would reduce your carbon footprint. So examples of this would taking out old, inefficient machinery, perhaps within a manufacturing business, or more commonly things that we have funded is taking out old, inefficient refrigeration units, maybe in a retail business, and replacing that with far more modern, energy efficient refrigeration units. So anything that you can demonstrate something that is previously inefficient, and by changing it you will reduce your energy consumption and associated levels of CO2. So those are the three main categories of sort of key projects that we can fund. In addition to that, we can fund any planning costs that may be subject to your application, or indeed energy audits to identify where the particular measures would be best suited within your business. So I've mentioned CO2 a couple of times. So with any of these grants that we are applying for, we have what's called outputs and outcomes. In other words, what is being achieved for the grant that we're rewarding. So in the case of the carbon dioxide grant, we've got to demonstrate that every grant that we award, there has been a tangible reduction in CO2 emissions from that grant and from that programme of work being undertaken. So therefore, in all cases, in order to apply for this grant and demonstrate what their impact has been, applicants will be required to calculate what their CO2 reduction actually is. Now that might sound a bit intimidating to begin with. Where we direct people to is the use of the government conversion tables. So that basically converts in real terms what your energy usage would be, and that allows you to calculate from that energy usage essentially what your CO2 reduction is going to be. So there is a way of doing it. The CO2 tables, the government conversion tables, do look a little bit intimidating to begin with, but once you look at those, that's how you calculate the carbon figure, and there are various online resources to help you through that process, if indeed it does at first seem a little bit intimidating. So how you would find those, if you put into your favourite search engine UK government greenhouse conversion factors, that will lead you to those tables where you can work out how to calculate the relationship between energy usage, or more importantly energy saved, and what the equivalent CO2 saving from that would be. Within our team, we can provide help in calculating those CO2 figures if required. Just contact us at the point that you apply for the application and start to undertake writing that up. If you are struggling with it, please do contact us, because we can provide help and support in providing and helping you to establish what those CO2 figures look like. So I've covered in broad detail the elements of the grant that are eligible. It's probably just also worth drawing attention to elements that are ineligible under this grant scheme as well. And again, this is not a completely exhaustive list, but it just highlights some of the key areas and things that we get asked about most commonly with regard to grant funding, but sadly we're unable to fund through this scheme. First of which is vehicles. So we do get inquiries from people that are looking to purchase usually EV electric vehicles. We cannot fund any type of vehicle under any of our grant schemes. It's just one of the things, sadly, that we're not able to fund. So vehicles, I'm afraid, electric or otherwise, is not something that we're able to support under this grant scheme. Similarly, we cannot fund EV charging points as a standalone request. So that's something else we couldn't cover. I've mentioned what triggers the step up towards the high level of funding beyond £10,000. However, any project that delivers less than 1.3 tonnes of carbon savings per 10k of funding wouldn't be considered to us to be sufficient value for money, and therefore something we wouldn't normally fund. So if you work out your project costs and your tonnes of CO2 and it comes in at less than 1.3, usually it's something that isn't that wouldn't be fundable under our T's and C's. If that does happen, however, please contact us and at least we can have the conversation around your application and look at what may be possible. But as a rule of thumb, anything less than 1.3 tonnes per 10k of funding would not be eligible. Specifically, green roofs, green walls would not be eligible under our scheme, and similarly we cannot fund Airbnbs and holiday lets through this particular carbon grant. It might be obvious, but it's worth highlighting anyway. Any projects where CO2 cannot be calculated wouldn't be fundable, because that is the figure by which we judge the project success or otherwise. So that ability to calculate the CO2 and you providing that figure to us as part of your application is crucial in terms of what we require. So what are the requirements of the scheme overall? It's a Swansea Council based grant aimed at Swansea Council businesses, and therefore your premises must be based within the Swansea Council area in terms of where the business is located and where you pay your rates to. Any applicant applying for this must provide a overall business summary, business plan, and a 12-month financial forecast. It's just a requirement that we just need to see an overview of your business to ensure that, broadly speaking, your business is financially viable going forward. Any element of expenditure will require 2 quotes, like-for-like quotes, and obviously we can only pay the lowest of those 2, so that you as the applicant and us as funder are both getting maximum value for money. If there's a single line of expenditure which is above £25,000, which may be possible and may be likely with regard to, say, CO2, we would require 3 quotes as opposed to 2. So a minimum of 2 quotes, like for like, or 3 if that expenditure is above £25,000. You need to provide us with 2 forms of ID, one of which would be photographic, so typically a passport or a driving licence, and you would need to provide us with a safeguarding policy if your business is working with children or vulnerable adults, an equalities policy, and also be able to answer questions on the use of the Welsh language. Don't worry too much about that last point. We're not requiring you to be fluent Welsh speakers or indeed complete a Duolingo course. It's just indicating that to us as a Welsh government, you've made some recognition and move towards use of the Welsh language where reasonable. So in terms of the carbon grant specifically, if you're looking to install infrastructure, solar panels on your roof, say, you must demonstrate to us that you either own the freehold for that premises, or if you're renting the premises as a tenant from a landlord, you must have a minimum of 5-year lease on that premises. So you would need to provide us with a rental agreement that indicates a 5-year term still to run on that particular lease. And if you are leasing, you must have written consent from your landlord to carry out those works on that premises as well. If you're carrying out, again, external works, so usually solar, you would need to have either full planning permission or a certificate of lawful development, so essentially a certificate to evidence that full planning permission is not required. In many cases, particularly if it's in the conservation area or near to the airport or near to the helipad at the hospital, you would require to have full planning permission. So just check with our planning team in terms of the scope of your work, whether that is a requirement for planning permission, and if it is, you would need to go through the process of seeking and obtaining that, or even if not, we would require that certificate of lawful development to evidence that that work is indeed not subject to planning application requirements in and of itself. So other requirements of the scheme are that applicants must have no arrears on their council tax and or business rates. This is a Swansea Council backed scheme, and therefore any applicant where the applicant essentially owes money to the council, we wouldn't be able to process your claim any further until those council tax or business rates arrears had been addressed. So we can only fund expenditure not yet incurred, so anything that has been paid for or ordered before you submit the application would not be subject to this particular support scheme. So how this would work is that if the application was approved at panel, you would essentially then get the green light to go ahead, incur that expenditure, and then you would submit evidence of that expenditure back to us, and then we would issue you with the respective amount of grant payable to you. So when you submit the application to us, it's vital that the expenditure that you're listing on that application has not been incurred at the point that you submit the application to us, and it's only expenditure that you incur after the grant has been assessed and hopefully approved. You may be aware that beyond the carbon grant itself, we are offering 4 grant schemes across all local LGF schemes. It's just worth mentioning that you can apply for up to 2 of those 4 schemes, but not the same scheme twice, and a maximum combined value of £50,000. So if you were to go for the full carbon grant at £30,000, that would essentially give you £20,000 to apply for one of the other schemes, most likely the growth grant that we are able to offer to you. So what are the mechanics of the scheme? So applicants would write to us via our email address that I'll share with you at the end and request an application form. We would then send that out to you. You would look through all the guidance, the T's and C's, and start work on the application form, and then send it back to us with all the supporting documents, some of which I've already covered, but the rest are covered on the detail of the scheme guidance. Once we receive that, we would go through 2 stages, first of which is compliance, essentially making sure that you are A, eligible, and B, that we have got all the supporting evidence and documentation that we require. And once it's been through compliance, we would then start a process of assessment of that grant. That would be carried out by a member of our team. That assessment officer would prepare a report with associated recommendation. That recommendation would go to our grant panel, where a final decision would be taken on whether to or not to approve your grant application. Difficult to provide exact timescales, but we reckon as a rule of thumb a timescale of between 2 and 4 weeks between the point at which you submit the application and the point at which you are able to get the grant assessed by panel. The more up and together, the more accurate your application is, the closer to 2 weeks it's likely to be. If we have to go back to you for various points of clarification or information is missing from that application, it's more likely to be 4, but 2 to 4 weeks is a general guide for how long it would be before we're able to get that application assessed and decided for you. If approved, you would then have 3 months to complete the application form, to essentially carry out the works, incur the expenditure and submit back to us the evidence of that expenditure. So it's a relatively tight timescale, particularly if you're carrying out solar works. You would need contractors lined up and ready to go, but it certainly is possible to complete a programme of work within those timescales. So what does the claim look like? When you submit the claim to us, we would require basically all evidence of expenditure that you've incurred. So that would be receipts or paid invoices from your contractor or from the supplier. We would need bank or credit card statements so we can match up the expenditure from your own bank account to the works that you state that you've paid for. When you get the offer letter, you'll receive a claim form and a funding agreement. Both of those would need to be signed and returned back to us. And if your application was subject to plan permission, we would need to see full plan permission, or again perhaps that certificate of lawful development, just to evidence that the works that you've carried out are in alignment with our planning service. And just finally then, a few top tips in terms of things that work well for us as a panel. I've mentioned that you need to supply a business plan and a financial forecast. Whilst this is a carbon grant with the aim of reducing carbon, do ensure that your business plan and your financial forecast are well constructed, because the panel won't get to meet you in person. They are basically forming their judgment upon the application form, the business plan and your financial forecast. So do make sure that those documents are robust and well constructed, because the panel will make their judgment upon those 3 documents. If you need help at any point when working through the application, please do contact us, and please do access that help and support available to you. Believe me, it's far easier for you to contact us and us to go back and work through the application than you to submit that and us to have to then go back to you and correct any errors or inaccuracies that there may be. So if you're looking through it, you don't understand something, you're not sure of anything, please do contact us during the application process, because it's far quicker and easier in the long run that you do that. And finally, this is a carbon grant, but it's also there to demonstrate and deliver business growth. So in the rationale behind your application, do try and explain how this is going to benefit the financial element, the business overall, and just really labour that business growth and the wider benefits of the application form that you have supplied to us. And finally then, just a point of reference so you know how to get hold of us. The email address that I mentioned earlier, growthgrant@swansea.gov.uk. That is where you'd write to us to request an application form for the growth grant, or as and when you're completing it, that is the best place to reach us via email for any queries that you may have. Doesn't mean that we can't set up a Teams call or a phone call with you to discuss the application, but use that email address there as the first point of contact, and we can go from there. We're also going to be running a series of regular surgeries and workshops, so if you wanted to sit down with us at a desk on a one-to-one basis, discuss the application with us, or even work through it with us, there'll be opportunity to do that throughout the county and city of Swansea on a roughly monthly basis. So look out for those opportunities via our business e-newsletter or our social media feeds. And then finally, do keep an eye on our website funding pages, which is swansea.gov.uk/business-funding, for any updates to the scheme. We anticipate the scheme is going to run throughout the course of the year, but before you submit the application or indeed apply for it, it may just be worth checking that web address there just to ensure that the funds are available and there's been no changes to the scheme since this video was first put out there. So I think that covers it all. Thank you for your attention. and look forward to receiving your application in due course. Thank you.